Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Flux, and welcome back to our 9th module of General Psychology. In this video, we're diving into what might feel like one of the heaviest lectures of this course, because today we're taking a guided tour through the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Now, I know what you're thinking, Dr. Flux, isn't the DSM just a massive list of mental health conditions? How are we going to cover all of that without completely zoning out? And honestly, I get it. The DSM is dense, and trying to memorize a bunch of categories and symptoms can feel overwhelming. But here's the thing. We're not just going to rattle off lists today. Instead, we're going to explore a few real stories to try to bring these disorders to life and show you how they shape our understanding of mental health. Before we get started, let's hit a couple of quick review questions from our last lecture. Who was one of the first modern figures to propose that mental health conditions were rooted in brain functioning? A. Charles Mercier, B. Philip Pinel, C. Dorothea Dix, or D. Sigmund Freud? The answer here is A. Charles Mercier. He was a British psychiatrist from the late 19th and early 20th centuries who focused on the role of the brain in depression. What is one key advantage of the DSM? A. It completely eliminates the stigma around mental health. B. It provides standardized criteria for diagnosing mental disorders. C. It focuses solely on psychological factors. Or D, it doesn't require any cultural considerations. If you chose B, you got it. The DSM provides standardized criteria for diagnosing mental disorders. This helps clinicians speak the same language when diagnosing and treating mental health conditions. Today, we're not going to list every single disorder in the DSM. That would take an entire semester, if not longer. I teach an entire class in abnormal psychology that you're welcome to take if you'd like to dive deeper. In this lecture, we're going to take a guided tour through some of the major categories. We'll start with a brief discussion of why we diagnose disorders in the first place. Then we'll discuss mood disorders like depression and bipolar disorder. We'll move through anxiety disorders, where I've also included OCD, even though it's not categorized as an anxiety disorder in the DSM-5. Then we'll dive into trauma and stressor-related disorders, psychotic disorders and dissociative disorders, and we'll wrap up by discussing neurodevelopmental disorders before finishing off with some summary and review. We're not just going to rattle off symptoms and criteria. We'll use some real-life case examples to make these disorders feel real and relatable. And along the way, we'll think critically about the strengths and limitations of the DSM, because as we've been discussing all semester, all models are wrong, but some are useful. Let's dive into some of the useful qualities of the DSM and our current diagnostic system. Let's start with a question. Why do we even bother classifying mental disorders in the first place? The main reason is to help clinicians diagnose and treat mental health conditions consistently. Imagine if every therapist or psychiatrist had a different definition of what depression or anxiety meant. It would be chaos. The DSM gives us a common language so that professionals can communicate clearly. The organization of disorders in this way then helps to facilitate treatment. Having clear guidelines and categories of disorders allows us to connect meaningful interventions with people's symptoms, which is hopefully the main point of all this. Diagnosis also helps guide research and influence things like public policy. If a condition isn't recognized in the DSM, insurance companies might not cover treatment for it, which has real-world consequences. But classifying mental health isn't easy. Mental health exists on a spectrum, and it's not always clear where to draw the line between feeling sad and having clinical depression, or between being worried and having an anxiety disorder. There's also the risk of overdiagnosis, turning normal human experiences into medical conditions. And as we talked about in our last lecture, cultural and societal factors play a huge role in how we understand and diagnose mental health. So what do you think? Do you think classifying mental disorders helps or hurts how we treat mental health in society? Do you think it helps by providing clarity and access to treatment? Do you think it hurts by risking overdiagnosis and stigmatizing normal experiences? Do you think it's both? It can be a useful tool, but it's not perfect? Or maybe you're still thinking about it. There's no right answer here. Some people find that having a diagnosis provides validation and access to treatment. Others worry that it can lead to stigmatization or over-pathologizing normal behavior. And honestly, both perspectives are valid. That's part of what makes this topic so complex and interesting. Let's start our tour of the DSM-5 with one of the most common and often misunderstood categories: mood disorders. Now, we all experience ups and downs. You're feeling sad after a breakup? It's totally normal. Getting excited about a new opportunity? Also normal. But what happens when these emotional states overstay their welcome, or become so intense that they interfere with daily life? That's where mood disorders come in. They aren't just fluctuations in how we feel. Mood disorders are defined by persistent disturbances in mood that affect how people feel, think, and function in their daily lives. There are two major types we'll focus on. Depressive disorders, where people experience prolonged sadness, hopelessness, or a loss of interest in activities they once enjoyed. And bipolar and related disorders, where people cycle between periods of depression and episodes of mania or hypomania, which we'll break down a bit in more detail soon. Let's start by discussing major depressive disorder, or MDD. This isn't just about feeling sad for a few days. We all experience sadness, it's part of being human. But depression is about persistent feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and a complete loss of interest in activities you once loved. To be diagnosed with MDD, these symptoms need to last for at least 2 weeks. But for many people, they stick around much longer. And it's not just emotional. Depression can affect your appetite, sleep, energy levels, and even your ability to concentrate. One of the most challenging aspects of depression is how it distorts reality. People often feel worthless, overwhelmed by guilt, and may even have thoughts of death or suicide. Depression is a serious mental health condition that affects every part of a person's life. Next up is bipolar disorder, previously referred to as manic depressive illness. This isn't just about mood swings or feeling up and down. Bipolar disorder is marked by distinct episodes of depression and mania or hypomania. So let's break down some of the types. Bipolar 1 disorder involves at least one full manic episode, a period of elevated mood, high energy, and often risky behavior. This can be followed by episodes of depression. Bipolar 2 disorder is characterized by hypomanic episodes, which are less intense than full-blown mania, and also paired with major depressive episodes. Cyclothymic disorder involves chronic fluctuations between mild depression and hypomania over at least 2 years. During a manic episode, people may feel invincible. They have racing thoughts, rapid speech, and they often take on risky behaviors, like impulsive spending sprees or dangerous activities. But after the high of mania, the crash into depression can be just as extreme. In this lecture, I want to highlight a few different people you may have heard of in the public eye who've experienced some of the disorders that we're speaking about. To start, let's take a moment to honor Carrie Fisher, best known for her role as Princess Leia in Star Wars, but also a trailblazer in the world of mental health advocacy. Carrie Fisher was fearlessly open about her struggles with bipolar disorder and substance use, particularly at a time when most people wouldn't dare speak out about mental illness. In her memoir, Wishful Drinking, and in countless interviews, she used her signature wit and humor to break down stigma and remind us that having a mental illness doesn't mean you can't lead an incredible life. Fisher once said, "I am mentally ill. I can say that. I'm not ashamed of that. I survived that. I'm still surviving it. Bring it on." We've covered mood disorders, but now let's dive into another condition that affects millions of people every day: anxiety disorders. Now, let's be real. We all experience anxiety. It's that feeling of nervousness before a big exam, the jitters before a first date, or the adrenaline rush that you get when you're about to give a presentation. Anxiety is a normal and even helpful emotion in many situations. It keeps us alert, prepared, and focused. But what happens when anxiety becomes constant, overwhelming, or even paralyzing? What happens when it stops being a helpful response to stress and starts interfering with your ability to live your life? That's when we enter the realm of anxiety disorders. Anxiety disorders are characterized by excessive fear or worry that goes beyond what's typical for a situation. It's not just feeling nervous about a big event. It's a persistent, often irrational sense of fear that disrupts your ability to function. These disorders can also come with physical symptoms, like a racing heart, sweating, or feeling like you're constantly on edge. And while anxiety is often triggered by specific situations, in many cases it can feel like it's coming from nowhere at all. We're going to break down a few key types of anxiety disorders, including generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, phobias, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. And while OCD has been reclassified in the DSM-5 under obsessive-compulsive and related disorders, it's still closely tied to the world of anxiety, and we'll explore a bit why. Let's start with generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD. This is the kind of anxiety where your mind feels like it's stuck in a constant what-if loop. People with GAD experience excessive, uncontrollable worry about a wide range of topics: work, health, relationships, finances, even when there's no real reason to worry. And this isn't just a passing phase. To meet the criteria for GAD, these symptoms need to last for at least 6 months. And again, it's not just mental. People with GAD often feel restless, have trouble sleeping, and experience muscle tension or fatigue. Imagine feeling like you're constantly bracing for something bad to happen, even when everything is technically fine. Next up is panic disorder, which involves sudden, unexpected episodes of intense fear, known as panic attacks. A panic attack feels like being hit by a wave of fear out of nowhere. Your heart races, you start sweating, it can feel like you're having a heart attack or even dying. There's often a sense of derealization, like the world around you isn't real, or depersonalization, where you feel disconnected from your own body. For people with panic disorder, these attacks aren't just random. They're followed by a persistent fear of having another attack. Just having a panic attack doesn't mean you have panic disorder, but a person may meet criteria if they experience this persistent pattern of fear. This fear can lead people to avoid certain places or activities, which can severely limit their lives. While the panic attacks in panic disorder can sometimes feel like they come out of nowhere, phobias or fears have a specific focus. They're intense, irrational fears of a particular object, situation, or activity, and they often lead to avoidance. There are a few different types. Specific phobias are fears of things like spiders, heights, or flying. Social anxiety disorder involves an intense fear of being judged or embarrassed in social situations. Agoraphobia is the fear of being in places where escape feels difficult, like crowded spaces or public transportation. Phobias can seem irrational from the outside, but for the person feeling them, that fear is very real, and it can have a huge impact on their ability to live freely. Now let's talk about obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD. OCD is characterized by obsessions, persistent intrusive thoughts that cause anxiety, and compulsions, repetitive behaviors or mental acts performed to reduce that anxiety. For example, someone might have an obsessive fear of contamination, leading to compulsive hand-washing rituals that interfere with daily life. It's important to note that while OCD has a lot in common with anxiety disorders, it's been reclassified in the DSM-5 under obsessive-compulsive and related disorders. But these symptoms, particularly the anxiety-driven nature of obsessions and compulsions, still tie closely to the anxiety family. And here's an important distinction. OCD isn't just about being neat or organized. That's a very common misconception. For many people, OCD can be debilitating, time-consuming, and emotionally exhausting, often in ways that are difficult to understand. For a real-world example, we can look to the amazing advocacy of Maria Bamford. Maria Bamford is a stand-up comedian and actress who's known not just for her sharp wit and unique voice, but also for her fierce honesty about living with OCD and other mental health challenges. In her stand-up and interviews, Bamford has spoken openly about experiencing intrusive thoughts that felt terrifying and nonsensical, and how those thoughts fueled intense compulsions. She's talked about how OCD impacted her ability to function, and how difficult it was to even recognize what was happening as a mental health issue at first. But what makes her story so powerful is how she weaves humor and vulnerability together. By speaking publicly, and often hilariously, about things like checking rituals, fear of harming loved ones, and the exhausting logic loops that OCD can create, Bamford has helped demystify the disorder and reduce stigma for thousands of people. And she's also been a vocal supporter of therapy and psychiatric care, sharing how cognitive behavioral therapy and medication helped her regain stability. In doing so, she reminds us that mental health challenges don't define a person, and that with the right support, people with OCD can thrive, create, and deeply connect with others. Now, we've talked about anxiety disorders, where fear and worry often arise from uncertain futures or perceived threats. But what happens when fear is tied directly to something that's already happened? Something so overwhelming that it leaves a lasting mark on how we think, feel, and interact with the world. That brings us to trauma and stressor-related disorders. These disorders arise from exposure to traumatic events, whether that's a car accident, a natural disaster, combat, abuse, or any situation where a person's sense of safety or control is shattered. And here's the thing. Trauma doesn't just affect the mind. It affects the body as well. It's like the past gets stuck in the present, replaying itself in unexpected ways. So let's dive into how it happens and what it looks like. Trauma and stressor-related disorders develop after someone experiences or witnesses a traumatic event. We're focusing primarily on post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD here, but this category also includes acute stress disorder and adjustment disorders. And while complex PTSD, or CPTSD, isn't formally recognized in the DSM-5, it's also an important emerging classification. So let's take a look specifically at the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. This disorder develops after exposure to a traumatic event, something that threatens a person's life, safety, or sense of control. PTSD is characterized by 4 major symptoms clusters. Intrusive symptoms. These include flashbacks, nightmares, or distressing memories that make it feel like the trauma is happening all over again. Avoidance. People with PTSD often avoid places, people, or activities that remind them of the trauma. Negative changes in mood and thinking. This can include persistent feelings of guilt or shame, feeling emotionally numb or detached from others, or having a distorted sense of blame. And then hyperarousal. This is the on-edge feeling, being easily startled, irritable, having trouble sleeping, or feeling constantly alert for danger. PTSD can result from a wide range of traumatic experiences, from combat to sexual assault, natural disasters, or serious accidents. To see what PTSD can look like in real life, let's look to the experience of Ariana Grande. Ariana Grande, a globally recognized pop star, developed symptoms of PTSD following the suicide bombing that occurred at her concert in Manchester, England. The attack killed 22 people, many of them children and teens, and left hundreds more injured. While she wasn't physically harmed, Ariana, like many survivors of trauma, was deeply affected by the event emotionally and physiologically. In interviews and public statements, she's described experiencing nightmares, debilitating anxiety, and intense emotional distress, especially in the months following the attack. At one point, she even shared brain scan images highlighting the differences in activity linked to PTSD, helping to destigmatize what can often be seen as an invisible experience. What's powerful about Ariana Grande's story is how she used her platform to talk about the lasting impact of trauma. She's been open about the challenges of performing again, and how her body and mind still sometimes respond as if the threat is happening all over, something many people with PTSD experience. Her vulnerability, especially as someone constantly in the public eye, reminds us that trauma doesn't discriminate. PTSD isn't just something experienced by combat veterans or people in war zones. It can affect anyone, including those who witness or survive acts of mass violence. And importantly, her story shows that healing is possible, even when the journey is long and nonlinear. Let's do a quick attention check. Which of the following is not a symptom of PTSD? Is it A, intrusive flashbacks or nightmares? B, avoidance of reminders of the trauma? C, persistent elevated mood and excessive energy? Or D, hyperarousal, like being easily startled or irritable? If you pick C, you're spot on. Persistent elevated mood and excessive energy are more characteristic of mania and bipolar disorder, not PTSD. PTSD is marked by hyperarousal, but that's very different from the energy surges that we see in mood disorders. Let's move on to a discussion about reality. Reality feels like something we should be able to trust, right? But in this class, we've already been challenging many of our basic ways of thinking about reality. Our sense of what's real is built on fragile layers of perception, memory, and interpretation. And sometimes those layers don't hold together. That's what we're exploring with psychotic and dissociative disorders, conditions where the mind's ability to connect with reality becomes disrupted. Psychotic disorders are characterized by challenges in modeling reality in ways that adaptively align with our social contexts. This might mean seeing or hearing things that others do not, like hallucinations, or holding distorted beliefs, like delusions, or struggling to organize thoughts in ways that make sense. Dissociative disorders, on the other hand, involve a disconnection from your identity, from your memories, or even your sense of self. They often arise as a response to trauma, as a way for the mind to protect itself from overwhelming experiences. These disorders might seem distant from everyday life, but they highlight something fundamental about the human experience. Our perception of reality is fragile. And in a world where misinformation, social media distortion, and information overload make it harder than ever to reach a consensus, understanding these disorders can help us build tools for navigating uncertainty. Let's start with schizophrenia, one of the most well-known and often misunderstood mental health conditions. Schizophrenia is a psychotic disorder that disrupts how people think, perceive, and respond emotionally. It's characterized by positive symptoms. These are additions to a person's experience, like hallucinations, hearing voices, or seeing things that aren't there, delusions, strong beliefs that don't align with a consensus reality, and disorganized thinking, speech that doesn't make sense or thoughts that feel scattered. It also includes negative symptoms. These are reductions in normal functioning, like flat affect, reduced emotional expression, alogia, limited speech, or avolition, lack of motivation. One of the biggest misconceptions about schizophrenia is that it's the same as dissociative identity disorder, what some people call multiple personalities. but the two are very different. And despite what movies and TV shows might suggest, people with schizophrenia are not inherently violent. In fact, they're much more likely to be the victims of violence than the perpetrators. Now let's shift to dissociative disorders, conditions where the connection to self and reality becomes fragmented. Dissociative disorders include disorders like dissociative identity disorder, where a person has two or more distinct identities that control their behavior at different times. Dissociative amnesia, where a person can't recall important personal information, usually related to trauma. And depersonalization and derealization disorders, where people feel disconnected from themselves or the world around them. While these conditions might seem extreme, dissociation is something that many people experience in milder forms, like zoning out during a boring lecture, though hopefully not this one, or feeling like time slows down during a stressful event. It's the mind's way of protecting itself from overwhelming experiences. So why does this matter beyond understanding these specific disorders? Because, as I mentioned before, our interpretation of reality is somewhat fragile. The same brain processes that allow us to interpret the world can also deceive us. Hallucinations and delusions aren't just random. They reveal how our brains construct reality. And while most of us won't experience psychosis or dissociation in a clinical sense, we all navigate a world where truth and perception are constantly being challenged. Think about how misinformation, social media distortion, and algorithmic echo chambers can make it hard to know what's real. Understanding how the mind can fracture reality gives us tools to build resilience, to stay grounded, to question what we see, and approach life with a sense of curiosity and compassion. Thinking this way can also help us build empathy for those who live with these conditions, because while their experiences might seem distant from our own, they remind us of a universal truth: reality isn't as solid as we think. To see what schizophrenia looks like in real life, let's look at the story of John Nash, a mathematician who was portrayed in the film A Beautiful Mind. John Nash was a brilliant mathematician who made groundbreaking contributions to game theory, but he also lived with schizophrenia. He experienced paranoid delusions, believing he was being pursued by secret government agents, and had vivid visual hallucinations that felt completely real to him. Despite these challenges, Nash continued to do incredible work in his field and eventually won a Nobel Prize. His story reminds us that schizophrenia isn't the end of a meaningful life, and that the line between reality and illusion can be incredibly hard to navigate. Let's pause for another reflection. Have you ever experienced moments where reality felt unstable or distorted? How do you think modern technology and media influence our perception of reality? Understanding psychosis and dissociation isn't just about mental health. It's about recognizing how fragile our sense of reality can be. And in a world where information is constantly shifting, learning how to stay grounded, curious, and resilient is more important than ever. So far, we've covered disorders that can develop at any stage of life, from mood and anxiety disorders to psychotic and dissociative disorders. But now we're shifting our attention to focus on something a bit different: neurodevelopmental disorders. These disorders don't emerge suddenly in adulthood. Instead, they start early in life, often before a child even begins school. They are impacted by the way the brain develops, influencing everything from learning and attention to social interactions and communication. But here's the thing: neurodevelopmental disorders aren't just about deficits or challenges. They also highlight the incredible diversity in how human brains function. Understanding these disorders helps us create more inclusive environments where people with different cognitive styles can thrive. First up is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. ADHD is characterized by inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. But it's so much more than just being hyper or easily distracted. ADHD affects executive functioning, the brain's ability to plan, organize, and regulate attention and behavior. There are different ways ADHD can present. The first is predominantly inattentive type, sometimes referred to as ADD, where the primary challenge is maintaining focus and organization. The second is predominantly hyperactive impulsive type, where restlessness and impulsivity are more prominent. And the third is combined type, where both inattention and hyperactivity are present. ADHD isn't just a childhood disorder either. Many adults live with ADHD, facing challenges in work, relationships, and daily life. And while it can be frustrating, understanding ADHD as a neurodevelopmental difference rather than just a set of deficits helps reduce stigma and build better support systems. Next up is autism spectrum disorders, or ASD. And according to our current diagnostic system, autism exists on a spectrum. Some people with ASD may have mild social challenges and live completely independently, while others may need significant support in daily life and may not even be able to communicate verbally. That's why we use the term spectrum, because the experiences of people with autism are incredibly diverse. Some common features of autism include difficulty with social interactions, like understanding social cues or maintaining eye contact, repetitive behaviors or strict adherence to routines, intense focus on special interests. It can also include sensory sensitivities, where sounds, light, or textures can become overwhelming, or in some cases not noticed at all. Understanding ASD is about recognizing this diversity and creating spaces where people with different social and sensory needs can feel supported and included. To see what autism looks like in real life, let's take a look at the story of Temple Grandin. Temple Grandin is a renowned animal behavior expert and advocate for people with autism. Diagnosed with autism at a time when resources were limited, she faced significant challenges with social communication. But she also had a unique ability to understand animal behavior, which revolutionized the livestock industry. Temple describes her brain as thinking in pictures, offering a window into how people with autism might process the world differently. Her story highlights not just the challenges of ASD, but also the strengths and unique perspectives that can come with neurodivergent thinking. It's a powerful reminder that supporting people with ASD isn't just about addressing challenges. It's about nurturing talents and embracing diversity. We've traveled through the vast landscape of mental health disorders, from their biological intricacies to their deeply personal and cultural aspects. We discussed why we diagnose in the first place, and then reviewed mood disorders, anxiety disorders, trauma and stressor-related disorders, psychotic and dissociative disorders, and wrapped up discussing neurodevelopmental disorders like autism and ADHD. But here's the key takeaway. Mental health isn't just about diagnostic labels or clinical checklists. It's about understanding the complex interplay between biology, environment, culture, and individual experience. The DSM gives us a framework to understand and diagnose mental health conditions, but it's just that, a model. And remember our quote for this semester, all models are wrong, but some are useful. The DSM helps us navigate mental health, but it doesn't capture the full human experience. Mental health is influenced by a mix of biological factors like genetics, brain chemistry, and neurodevelopment, psychological factors including thought, emotions, and behavior, and social and cultural factors like relationships, community, and societal norms. No single model can fully explain the complexity of mental health. It's about integrating biological, psychological, and social perspectives, and more importantly, listening to the individual stories of the people behind the diagnosis. Let's wrap up with some quick review. Which of the following is no longer categorized as an anxiety disorder in the DSM-5? A. Generalized anxiety disorder, B. Panic disorder, C. Social anxiety disorder, or D. Obsessive compulsive disorder? If you pick D, you've got it. While OCD shares many features with anxiety disorders, it's now in its own category, obsessive compulsive and related disorders. Which of the following is a dissociative symptom rather than a psychotic one? A. Hearing voices that aren't there, B. Feeling detached from your body as if you're watching yourself from the outside, C. Believing you're being followed by secret government agents, or D. Having disorganized thoughts and speech? If you picked B, you're right. Feeling detached from your body is a symptom of dissociation, often seen in depersonalization derealization disorder. The other options are more characteristic of psychotic symptoms like hallucinations and delusions. Mental health isn't static. It's a journey that's shaped by our biology, our experiences, and the society we live in. Whether you're learning about mental health to better understand yourself, support someone you care about, or simply to broaden your perspective, remember, there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to mental health. It's complex, it's personal, and it's always evolving. It is this perspective on mental health that was one of the major inspirations behind my lecture sign-off. So as we wrap up, I invite you to reflect on this as you stay curious, stay resilient, and above all, live life in flux. I'll see you in the next lecture.